You know that moment when you're standing in a job site. A full-day crew is waiting on you to finish a rough cut, and the old portable saw you've been rotating through just can't keep up? I've been there, and the last thing you need is a tool that feels like a gamble. That's why I wanted to break down the SAWSTOP Contractor saw before you decide to drop a serious chunk of cash on it. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest fear most people have with a contractor-type table saw is the safety factor. We all remember that story about a friend who lost a fingertip on a cheap blade and still can't bring himself to sit at a saw without a second guess. The SAWSTOP system is built around a brake that literally drops the blade within milliseconds the moment it senses skin. In the field, that translates to a peace of mind you can't put a price tag on. If you've ever had to stop a project because a junior carpenter got too close and you were left scrambling for bandages, that safety net changes the whole dynamic of how you schedule work. Now, let's talk about the practical side of setting it up on a busy shop floor. The unit measures just under 70 inches wide, 45 inches deep, and a little under 35 inches tall, so it's a fairly compact footprint for a 36-inch rip capacity. The T-Glide Advance fence slides smoothly, and because it's a full-length track, you can lock it in place at any point along the rip. In real terms, that means you can line up a 24 for a perfect 1-inch cut, then shift the fence a half-inch without having to remeasure or worry about the fence drifting. I've seen contractors use it to rip a series of identical joist lengths for a deck, and the consistency held up across a full day's worth of cuts, which saved them from recutting and wasted material. One hidden trade-off is the weight. The safety system adds a lot of metal, and the saw tips the scales at a heft that makes moving it a two-person job. If you run a mobile operation where you load the saw onto a truck and unload it at multiple job sites, you'll need to factor in that extra effort. That said, the same mass gives the saw a solid, vibration-free feel once it's running. When you're cutting a long piece of hardwood for a tabletop, you won't feel the usual shake that makes the cut wander. The steadiness is a real advantage if you're trying to keep tolerances tight on a custom piece. Power is another area where the SAWSTOP stands out. The 1.75 HP motor delivers enough torque to handle dense hardwoods, engineered lumber, and even some light metal cutting with the right blade. In a typical residential remodel, you might be ripping 26 studs for framing walls, then flipping the blade to a finer tooth for a clean finish on a crown molding. The motor doesn't bog down, and the speed stays consistent, which means you won't have to pause and let the saw recover between cuts. That reliability is something you only notice after you've spent a few hours on a job and the saw is still humming along. So who should actually invest in this machine? If you're a professional contractor, a dedicated woodworking shop, or a serious hobbyist who spends a good chunk of time ripping lumber, the SAWSTOP Contractor saw pays off. The safety system alone can prevent a costly injury, and the precision fence makes it easier to hit tight specs without a secondary jig. It also shines for anyone who does repetitive cuts. Think a production line of door frames or a batch of shelving units. The initial cost is higher than a generic contractor saw, but the combination of safety, accuracy, and durability can offset the expense over time by reducing waste, downtime, and potential medical bills. On the other side of the coin, if you're an occasional DIYer who only pulls out a table saw a few times a year, you might be better off with a lighter, less expensive model. The extra safety features are fantastic, but you may never truly experience the scenario where a bladestop event saves a fingertip. Also, if your workspace is cramped and you can't accommodate a 36-inch rip capacity, you'll end up fighting for space rather than enjoying the convenience the saw promises. For those situations, a smaller benchtop saw or a portable sliding compound might make more sense. Let's get into the practical weaknesses that tend to surface after the purchase. The first is the reset process after a safety activation. When the brake engages, the blade drops, the motor shuts off, and you have to manually lift the blade back into place, replace the brake cartridge, and re-engage the power. It's not a huge hassle, but it does interrupt workflow, especially if you're in the middle of a high-volume job. The good news is that most users find the reset takes under a minute, and they